We're going to discuss in this session a very important element to the mourning process. And although the reality is that we begin to mourn, we're considered avelim upon death, and even more so upon burial, there are some preliminary steps that people need to address before the actual death. Growing up and serving a community for over 20 years, where we have Jews that are in the ages that are closer to death than birth, 70s, 80s, 90s, and 100s, I'm always reminding people about the importance to pre-establish and pre-arrange the funeral needs, so that when, God forbid, someone does pass away, it doesn't become a arduous burden on the person and on the family who has to deal with it. Planning ahead, as we always joke, is the way Satan says, they're prepared, I'll let them be. It's those that are not prepared that always, when someone dies, right away they lose it and they're deeply challenged. So I always encourage and inspire people to plan ahead at any age. Buy a plot, arrange it, write a will, and take the necessary steps to plan accordingly so that when, God forbid, someone does pass away, there's a protocol that's followed. And most importantly, what I want to bring up here, and I think is very important to mention, is, of course, that a Jewish person should be buried according to Jewish law. And according to Jewish law, quite frankly, means that any funeral home should be preferably, of course, a Jewish funeral home. But if for some reason or another it can't be a Jewish funeral home, to make arrangements with the Jewish Funeral Society that there should be a tahara. A tahara means that the body should be purified with water, and there's a process in how that is done. Additionally, that the body should be clothed in humble clothing, which is tachrichen, made of cotton or linen. These are shrouds that are used to cover the entire body, head to toe. And they're placed then in a simple box, not to waste money on, of course, fancy clothing to be buried with, or a fancy box, but a simple pine box is traditionally what we use in Jewish law. Excuse me. It's very important that these kinds of things are preset. Often there are multiple family members that need to address these needs. Sometimes it's a spouse that needs to address these needs. And when they're established in advance, there's less stress and less pain in trying to make some of these decisions. So if you have these protocols set out in advance, this is something that's very good to do. Also, of course, to make sure that there's a certain funeral home that's going to arrange the transfer of the body from wherever the person is deceased to the chapel where the body will be prepared for Jewish burial, and then eventually to be brought to the cemetery and interred and buried according to Jewish law. Something that has come up numerous times already in my personal experience is the idea of the lengthy delay in seeing to the burial of a person. A year or two ago, a situation had come to our attention, particularly because our synagogue has a plot in Long Island where we have numerous hundreds of burial spaces, and someone had held on to mom for close to 2 months. I'm not sure if it was a refrigerator or a freezer. And when I tried to finally get a hold of the family, when they requested a permit from the synagogue to bury and to inter the body, I had found out then that it had already been numerous weeks. And I started to research to find out if there's anything that I could do to see to it that the body should be buried earlier, because according to Jewish law, there's a mitzvah in the Torah that says a person should be buried on that day. In certain circumstances, for very good reasons, 2 days, maximum a longer period of time. But there has to be really good reason, logistically, technically, or spiritually, in order to delay a burial. And here it was already a few weeks. And I went to the New York State Cemetery Board, and there was very little that they could do. We went to various Jewish Chevra Kadisha, various funeral chapels. There was very little that they could do. And at that time, our board of directors met, and we concluded that we needed to address the actual law of the plots of the cemetery. And within law, we changed the bylaws of the plots that a person needs to be buried within a shorter period of time. And this is something that you may not be aware of. In fact, most people may not be aware of what the laws are of the plots, what the laws are of the state, and to be aware of the fact that it's possible that someone could elongate the amount of time for burial. And this is something we have to be very, very careful with, because we're transgressing a biblical commandment by delaying the burial in the appropriate way and in the proper time span, time space, that it should be buried properly, not to be delayed. And in life, very often there are delays, whether it's weather or whether it's finances, to try to establish things as much in advance as possible so that these things don't get in the way. And if unfortunate circumstances come our way, and unforeseeable circumstances, or circumstances that there's nothing we can do about it, is one thing. But if there are things that we can do about it, there are things that we can do to see to it that the person gets buried in the proper time and fashion, we have to do it as best as possible. So this family, unfortunately, took a few weeks till they made the arrangements. Family from Switzerland, another one from California. It was a technical, logistical issue, and the family had very little moral groundings, definitely not spiritual groundings, until the family eventually buried their mom. Ironically, the family said to me, "Oh, don't worry, Rabbi, because for our dad, we also had him in the refrigerator or the freezer for X amount of weeks." And what I'm telling you is extremely painful, and it's insanity. But this is the truth. This is the reality of what could happen, and we need to be very careful. This week, it happened again, and that's why I'm bringing it to our attention. Plan ahead. Have a living will. Have a healthcare proxy. Have a Jewish healthcare proxy. People that are going to make decisions for you in your lifetime when you're sick, in your lifetime when you're incapacitated. Posthumously, after you pass away, there should be someone that makes the decisions. It should be legally documented. It should be certified. It should be notarized. It should be placed with your lawyer, your doctor, your rabbi, your confidant, your executor, people that make the decisions during and the end and after your life. It's very important that these things are addressed. And of course, that once the Jewish burial is there, that it should be supervised properly according to Jewish law, and it should be coordinated properly according to Jewish law. There are many laws that are associated with what a person does in the cemetery, what a person does prior to the cemetery, what a person does prior to the burial, which perhaps we'll go into at some point. At this time, this is an important issue that I thought I would bring up and share with the masses. And of course, to be careful, to plan ahead, to plan accordingly, and to do the best that they can within the circumstances of life. But when we plan ahead and we plan accordingly, we're able to establish things as much as possible. And finally, very often in life, people are not well, and they're making decisions wrongfully or illfully. And sometimes it's not just a physical illness, but also a mental illness. Sometimes people have all sorts of psychological disorders which disable them from making healthy decisions, whether they're bipolar or whether they're OCD or hoarders, people that really have a very difficult time making healthy decisions. And obviously there's a broad spectrum here, but this is what we find commonly, is that it's a health issue, that when the issue was not in writing beforehand, that decisions that are needed to be made posthumously upon a person's death are being deterred, are being interfered with because of mental health of other family members. When this is addressed and when this is considered, when this is understood that this may be a reality in advance, as best as possible, a lot of these unfortunate realities upon death could be avoided. And that's why it's very important that we know the laws of burial, we know the laws of Jewish burial, we know the legalities, we establish things in advance to the best of our ability. God should bless you, that if you lose a loved one, God should bless that loved one, should have a peaceful resting place in heaven. And if you yourself are not well, God should bless you that you should be healthy and well. And ultimately, like the prophet says, Ruach hatum avrim min haaretz, the spirit of impurity and folly should be removed from the world. And Mocha Hashem dimam